Hi there, I'm Caitlin Cattell from the Kodo News team. Joining me is Mayor Sean Murphy. Hi, Sean.
Hi, how are you, Caitlin?
I'm great today. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks.
Thanks for coming in. This is the last mayoral update of the year of 2016. So I thought, what a great chance to reflect back on the year a little bit. I know there's kind of a running joke that people say 2016 belongs in a trash fire, but
A dumpster fire.
yeah.
Well, there's some of that.
But
there's
not
also some good things.
necessarily so here in Telluride. You know, we had a lot of good things going on in our bubble. So I want to hear from you. What were some of your top 5 moments as mayor in 2016?
I really think that one of the top moments for the whole region is the fact that we passed SMART, and that's something that's bigger than all of us, and it's you can't underestimate the potential future value that's going to come out of that. Now, as you know, we're right now in the middle of a process of sort of getting that organization up and running and equipping it with the right advisors and looking for an executive director and beginning to collect tax revenue as of January, and then the town and the county and the town of Mountain Village working together toward trying to figure out what a master plan is and how we start to map out ancillary or supplemental services that will come out of that later on next year. So maybe when we talk again in 12 months, we can point to some new routes and some other tangible outcomes already. So new equipment perhaps. So
What else for 2016?
well, I would say, you know, in the category of dumpster fire, we did have a pretty unsatisfactory outcome from my point of view about the conversation around the public-private partnership model.
Which happened just yesterday.
We did. The town council voted by 4-3 to not join the collective group consisting of the county and Mountain Village and the Telluride Foundation that had already agreed to a memorandum of understanding. So 4 members of our council felt, for various reasons, that they were not prepared to agree that the town should be part of that working group.
Let's talk about that a little bit further. So you were pretty adamant to signing this MOU.
Yeah,
Why is that?
I think I've wanted to try to get out in front of the discussion on this, and if you attended or watched or listened to the work session 3 weeks ago or the meeting yesterday, the real takeaways for me were, just like regional transit, we all do our own knitting in terms of our own housing programs. There's nobody or no entity that's going to somehow take that away from any of the constituent government members. But in this case, we had a real opportunity to tap a different source of capital. And so anybody familiar in more detail than they probably want with the town of Telluride's affordable housing program knows that we basically have a revolving fund of about $2 million. We collect about $500,000 every year in addition through our 0.5% sales tax that goes toward housing. And so our universe of funding is circumscribed accordingly. And so we've historically done projects like Spruce House, where we put a big chunk of that $2 million into the project, and then we sell the units and then claw those funds back and then recycle them in another project. The public-private partnership would have relieved the town or any of the government's requirements of coming up with capital to do a project. So the idea was, this is really a supplemental, entirely supplemental effort that would have delivered more affordable housing, more employee housing into the market than the 3 governments could have done on their own, or frankly working together among just the governments. Because in that case, in the case of a public-private partnership, there was someone else that would be coming to the table with the 20% down, let's say, and then there'd be a financing component that would, whether it's a rental project or a sale project, and so you would conceivably have taken that burden off of the shoulders of the governments to come up with the down payment, in effect, to do a build.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, one of the other reasons that I was supportive of this was that I felt that it was not the most good faith sort of stance for the town of Telluride to be taking to basically slam the door on the party that brought this to our attention, which was the Telluride Foundation. In this case, the Telluride Foundation, at its own expense, had commissioned a study of the regional housing need. And in fact, the county did their last assessment in 2011, but this is basically an 18-month-old vintage study as to the need, basically figuring out what the demographics are that were being underserved in terms of area median income bands.
The Telluride Foundation study is 18 months old.
Yes,
Okay.
approximately. Don't quote me on that, but that's,
Ish.
They've been looking at this independent of the governments, and this is actually another area where this is a unique opportunity that we've blown. how many other partners do you have out there that actually are thinking about the same problems that government is trying to, solve, and saying, okay, here's another way forward, and here's a different approach, and we're happy to, in their case, they put their money where their mouth was, not once but twice. First, they commissioned this study, so approximately a year and a half ago. They collected the data from the study. Then they went to the towns and to the county and said, hey, we'd like to try to stitch together a collaborative effort here, and we'd like to basically put $50,000 of our money, the Telluride Foundation's money, into this as seed capital so that we can all sit down and start forming a formal group that would do nothing but look to engage ultimately an owner's representative. That proved to be a difficult sticking point for a number of members of the Telluride Town Council.
Probably not of Mountain Villages, though, because Mountain Village is all about the public-private partnership and seeking that kind of thing. But why do you think it didn't have the buy-in quite?
I think
there was there for Telluride.
I think there are a couple of currents that pushed against this goal or this model. One of these is truly and honestly provincialism. There is a strong feeling, and it's a source of pride among many council people, and I share that the town of Telluride has basically done more than its fair share of housing and of building and of creating housing for the regional workforce. And we'll continue to do that. And Councilperson Brown, though, framed, I think, the question far better than I could, and the simple question was, is that enough? And the answer to that, I think, is clear to everybody. The answer is no. And because housing is a regional problem, it was important for the town of Telluride to yes, acknowledge that it does a fine job in doing what it does, but also be very aware of the fact that it's possible to get more faster and at no cost to government if we would have simply collaborated. And so there was some, also there was pushback and concern about the possibility that, well, this owner's rep is going to cost something. So let's say it costs between $100,000 and $200,000 in a given year. So some members of council were extremely sensitive to the fact that the town, and in fact, there again, another non-government party has already stepped up and said, we'll pay a quarter of whatever the cost is. Our $50,000, their $50,000 would have gone toward that initially and given us the head start that we needed. The governments, the three governments, the two towns, and the county would have then absorbed the remaining tranches of 25% each. So, that being said, that did not mean that those parties had to necessarily come out of pocket and forever, part with those funds, but rather there could have been a mechanism that I advocated for as well, and that was clearly contemplated in any of the memorandum of understanding that was circulated to us, was in fact to allow for a clawback of those funds, so that when a project is completed and sold or rented, and there's a stream of payments coming out of a rental project, let's say, that each of those governments could have been reimbursed. And so I think it's a real shame. And unfortunately, not only is it rebuffing the party that's come to the three governments and tried, I think as an honest broker, to try to stitch together some sort of a collaboration, we've not only kind of, I think, slammed the door in their face, we've also probably cut off access to any of their donor population that would have been the source, potentially, for this 20% equity in any particular public-private deal that would have been achieved. So we've cut off our nose in that way. In my opinion, we've also pulled the rug out from under our partners, because it's my understanding that following the decision that was taken by the Telluride Town Council yesterday, that the Telluride Foundation is not willing to move forward with the proposal. So we have basically now removed the $50,000 funding source from a third party, and we have no working group that the town is part of.
So you just got that news yesterday?
I did,
from
late
the
last
Telluride
night.
Foundation?
I received word from some of the people that have been involved in the process, yes, that would be, and frankly, that result was clearly contemplated yesterday at the meeting, at the town council meeting in Telluride. The question was asked, and I think some council members may have wanted to engage in a game of chicken over the language of the MOU and decided, well, we just won't approve this because we're not satisfied yet with the language.
Right.
The issue
there was not, it's not like they were completely against signing it. They liked some of the ideas, from what I understand.
Well, I come at this from my background was I was a mergers and acquisitions attorney for 16 years before I moved to Telluride. And so, first of all, I know that there's no such thing as getting every piece of language the way I want it in any multi-party agreement. That's true here as well for the memorandum of understanding. There were certain council members who pointed rightly to some internal inconsistencies within the draft memorandum of understanding. And in fact, the fact that that memorandum of understanding had already been adopted unanimously by the Telluride, by the Town of Mountain Village Town Council and unanimously by the San Miguel County Commission, we were not in a mode at that point, as of yesterday or as of 3 weeks ago, to have a discussion about, well, how about we change this word to that, or we delete this reference, or we solve this inconsistency. So the point was, and frankly the messenger, the foundation said, look, it's up to the parties, the three governments, to tweak this document if and when this entity gets off the ground. So it wasn't like you were being told, well, this is the ironclad, roadmap.
Right.
It's this way or the highway. And in fact, in this case, there was, I think, some oversensitivity to some language, and certainly being an attorney by trade, I am very sensitive to the fact that when you do sign a contract or you do sign an agreement, then you are expected to live up to the terms. So I think what was missing from the dialogue yesterday, and what I tried to point out at various junctures, was, look, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The good here is the regional housing, and that good is lost. At least the public-private mechanism to create more of it.
Yeah, and when you
So-
said that, it drew in some looks from council
Oh,
members.
okay. I wasn't focused on my colleagues' faces,
Yeah.
so
Maybe like some of that going on, but
okay. Well, this is a really prime example, and I think this is really, this is the counterbalance to the tremendous success on transit this year. This is a huge missed opportunity. And unfortunately, it's maybe not just a missed opportunity, it's sent the wrong message. So we've taken a couple steps forward on transit, and we've taken a giant leap back on housing, at least as a regional collaborative effort. So I think at this point, we need to be very aware, and this is, some people think that this is kind of a game and that there's this sparring that goes on and that some of this is kind of personality driven, or there may be some other people's sort of agendas, me included. People have said that of me. It's not a game. This is a real life consequence of taking a decision or not. And so this is a stark reminder that the sort of things that we talk about and that we vote on have real life consequences. Those consequences here are, we've lost the willing facilitator, we've lost seed capital, and we've effectively pulled the rug out from under our other two governmental partners. And I'm not proud of that.
Yeah.
So I'm very proud of my vote to support a memorandum of understanding. I will continue to support that in the future. I look at this as perhaps maybe just a giant bump in the road or a huge pothole that we've fallen into. To be honest with you, we have to dig our way back out of that hole. And I think we've also unfortunately sent the message, this is the law of unintended consequences. We've not only rebuffed the Telluride Foundation, but we've sent the message out to a broader audience of potential third-party developers. Frankly, this is exactly the reason that you want an owner's representative in this process, because you don't want one or more of the government partners having a fickle change of heart or having personality-driven arguments that really eclipse the good of the goal.
Yeah.
And the goal has to be, in this case, and I hope remains, providing more incremental housing opportunities for people. But we didn't do that yesterday. And I'm not proud of the outcome, and I think that when you look back on this, I don't think we're going to see any private capital coming into this market for a number of years now because of this, because we sent a damaging message. And frankly, I had a conversation, there was a gentleman who presented at last fall's Ideas Festival on housing, a gentleman named Peter Bell from Washington, D.C. And Peter called me in advance and he said, I just want to give you a heads up that I'm going to be very critical of the governments. And one of his theses in his presentation, he actually specializes in doing tax credit finance projects, so a lot of federal and state tax credits for certain lower income levels. He said, you know what, I would, and he does believe, and I think in this case it was unfortunately maybe confirmed, he said, I don't think government really wants this. I don't really think you want it badly enough, because you have to make fundamental sacrifices and choices. In our case, we would have needed to swallow some of our pride over our own housing achievement, over our own housing expertise.
Right.
There was concern as well that we might be stretching our housing personnel manager, Lance McDonald, our special projects manager, too thin. And frankly, that is an argument for doing the public-private partnership and delegating some of those duties over to an owner's rep. but some council members were uncomfortable with the fact that Lance would be a likely member of that board, of that collaborative group, the oversight committee, and so there was concern, and I shared that concern, but that's no reason to just, torpedo the entire project. So that's unfortunately a huge part of 2016 and a loss, and I don't expect that to come back in 2017, or maybe for a while after.
One of the highlights for 2016 was, for me, was 2 years ago I covered these meetings. This was before you were mayor, with the development of Mill Creek, the parcels on county land. This is Deep Creek Mesa and Mill Creek. And even it was finalized just the other day at the Board of County Commissioners meeting. And even though it's not on town land, there were people in the audience that felt like there should have been town representation in that meeting, or that the town could have done more to perhaps stop the development or entice them to add more affordable housing. What do you say to that? Why wasn't the town present at that meeting?
Well, I don't have a specific. I know Mr. Clifton was asked that question and he gave a response. And frankly, that conversation, as you've observed, that's a multi-year process that's working its way down to a few final steps for at least the conceptual approval. And I think you heard the members of SMBC, specifically their attorneys, say that if there are other options that emerge, this is a project they don't envision coming out of the ground for up to 10 years.
Right.
And so the fact that there is this, there shouldn't be a notion that we've missed our window of opportunity to have some sort of collaboration. This thing, to be very blunt, recycles through some of our, I think, less than productive and healthy prior discussions about, well, if we're going to do anything to be supportive of that, we have to annex it. Or if you would like us to provide any sort of basic infrastructure like water and sewer, then you have to submit to our set of rules, be they the affordable housing guidelines that might apply to whatever the affordable housing requirement is for those parcels. But frankly, it is not within the town limits of town of Telluride. It is adjacent to, and so it is first and foremost, that's the purview of San Miguel County. And it's not our right, and it's really not appropriate for one government to be showing up at another government's, commission meeting and saying, well, we don't like the terms that you're about to reach under the code, your code that you wrote. So in some ways, I find that argument a little bit of a stretch, but I also think that it's a huge opportunity there. I mean, it is a high-profile parcel, and frankly, it would be my preference in an ideal world that the town would take a look at seeing if we could perhaps acquire that. And frankly, you would ask, well, where are you going to get the money to do that? I think a prime source of funding to have that kind of a discussion and actually be put in a position where we might be able to do that is to sell the East End lots. So there on the East End, as you well know, I know, the zoning is allowing only 2 dwelling units per lot, and you have about a dozen buildable lots in that area, and so the idea that you would be creating 24 units, albeit for whatever purpose, affordable housing or senior housing, that needs to be evaluated through the lens of, okay, but if you sold that property, could you buy, let's say, that whole wrap around Brown Family Homestead? Maybe San Miguel Valley Corporation historically has, held land very long term. But in this case, they've signaled an intent to part with this land. And so I think there's an opportunity to figure out, is there an overlap here where our interests and their interests overlap? They get the economic sort of expectation met that they want, and we figure out what's the cost and how can we put the financing or the assets in place or liquidate in order to do that. So I don't think by any means that the discussion ended this past week on that, or that a door was closed, or that unlike the P3 thing, it's not like we've pulled up the drawbridge and said, well, sorry, we're just not interested in talking to you. So please don't misunderstand. I'm only one voice of 7, and I've been outspoken in the past about the fact that I've said just what I've told you before. I've also been an advocate for trying to knit the Lawson Hill community in with the town, and frankly, I would love to be able to have a more comprehensive discussion just along the lines of the P3 regionalism. This is the Telluride region. It's not just the town of Telluride. And so, yes, there are different actors and different governmental fiefdoms involved, And so while respecting, the basic organic law of any of those governments and allowing them to have their own processes play out, which in this case is exactly what happened, no more, no less, then there will be an opportunity, I'm sure.
Just looking at the subject of housing as a whole, I hear a lot from the public. I hear a lot of complaints they should be doing more, this and that. If you could make a plea to the public to tell them how they could actually take, real action, should they start showing up at council meetings?
You know what?
Should they
That
start?
would have been Exhibit A. People should have come out by the dozen yesterday to this meeting to say, you know what? We get it. We understand that you, the government, is going to bring online, your next month in January. It sounds like people I know that are doing closings of the Spruce House units. Yes, those 8 units are delivered to market. Hopefully next year we'll be starting a 1.5-year process of building Virginia Plaster. Virginia Plaster is going to deliver 46 rooms in a boarding house format. It's going to deliver 18 units, 3 of which are studios, and the other 15 are all 2-bedroom units, and there are going to be 3 tiny homes in that process. So, but look, there's your, the dollar value of that Virginia Plaster project. If we are assuming that we put 20% into it or whatever, it covers a lot of our available resources. And so what should have happened is that people should have stood up and said, you know what, who cares about person A and person B's personalities and their past relations, or that, let me be blunt again, there are some people who just don't like the Telluride Foundation. They think that the Telluride Foundation is, plays an outsized role, let's say, in some dialogues, and that the Telluride Foundation represents maybe the interests of others and outsiders, not the town. So, but that's no reason that you don't do business with that kind of a partner. And so we should have had people saying, hey guys, swallow your pride, stop this historical, edge that might exist between the foundation and certain town, folk, and get something else going.
Yeah.
So that would have been a prime opportunity and a missed opportunity, unfortunately. I think the other thing is people can still start demanding that we try to find other ways that the 3 governments can collaborate. Again, it's going to absorb some of that same limited capital pool that we all have. And I'm not a spokesman for the San Miguel County, but what I hear frequently is that the county has even more limited resources that they could put toward this kind of a project. So the county obviously has a couple of parcels that could be put into play, and the county has zoning power. So I think we also have a real opportunity to watch what the 2 new county commissioners do, because each of them is hugely sensitive to the same problem. And we won't all agree. Frankly, yesterday, Hillary Cooper came to our meeting, and she voiced her opposition to this P3 plan. And I didn't agree with that, but that doesn't mean that Hillary and I won't want to work together. That doesn't mean that we won't want to try to think about, hey, is there another way as a P2, you've got the land, we've got maybe some more budget, or we could sell something to come up with some monies in order to build an improvement, a housing improvement on your land. And I think there's less resistance now. I think the disconnect between the county and the town specifically used to be, oh, well, we regarded their deed restriction, language as far looser than ours, and we wanted to impose our own, and they, by the same token, thought ours was maybe a little too extreme. So, but I think, just like you saw in the regional transit conversation, actually, Councilperson Brown made this point yesterday, saying, look, we were stalling out on this housing discussion, and we were kind of reaching the point where we were 3 years ago on regional transit. That was, we had a form of an agreement. The parties were too overly hyper-focused on language that they thought divided them, or that somehow gave one party an advantage over the other, or obligated one party to do something that maybe that party wasn't entirely comfortable doing yet. But like we saw in that transit discussion, you have to sit around the same table with each other, and you have to, be open to expressing and airing your own, concerns, and where you see your own vulnerability being, and where you actually think they need to give. And then I think that process is about to unfold as of January with the 2 new county commissioners in the mix. And of course, Joan May has been an outspoken advocate for housing. So I think everybody is really on the same page. And frankly, that's what disturbs me a lot about yesterday. I'm sorry to keep going there, but we all have the same goal. And the odd thing was the county, again, having very limited resources, the county unanimously voted to participate in this collaboration. And I asked Joan May specifically, and actually Lynn Black, who was a county finance person who was attending our meeting yesterday actually confirmed that the county's view of the arrangement for this P3 was that they wouldn't be effectively seeding $50,000 or more out of their own pockets. They might be putting that up short term and then getting it all back once a project actually came to life. That was exactly the same position that the town could well have been in.
Yeah.
So we needed people to come out and basically go, yeah, that's what we want. Do it. So there's always room to improve. There's always more that we can and we will try to do. And we can always be open to each other. And just because we don't agree on a given Tuesday doesn't mean that, 2 months later we don't have some overlap of interests. And so I'm happy to continue to work on the process, but I really think that, the fact that we're down to 2 Ps now and no private, two publics and no private, getting even the third public to the table, I'm not sure if that gets us any more housing, and it sure doesn't get us housing as quickly as the other alternative could have. So.
Yeah. Well, let's switch from housing to transit.
Sure.
I was joking earlier about Monday's meeting being a very riveting discussion on transit. The SMART board met, which you are on, and you're tasked with finding legal counsel. Sounds like fun. There wasn't too much going on in that meeting. There weren't any big decisions made or anything, but can you give us a sense of the timeline here and where we're at with hiring an administrator?
Well, we had, that was our second meeting actually since SMART was formed. According to the ballot measure. And so we had a meeting back on November 15th where we sort of laid out, here's some of the initial to-dos. We have to put out a request for a proposal to legal service providers. Yesterday's or Monday's meeting on transit, we said, well, we also need a bookkeeping service provider. We also fundamentally need a leader. And that's a role that I think there have been some, just like if you don't ask, you don't know who's out there, who's interested. I know that there had been a CDOT delegation that came recently and interfaced with some of those SMART members. And even through that interaction, I understand that we may have leads on a couple people who might make great executive directors. So the executive director position will be posted, I think, within the next month. And then we'll have hopefully a pool of candidates to consider in the coming couple of months. So I would expect that during the second quarter of 2017 that we would have decided on an executive director, and that person would be in the process of moving to and starting to build a staff and lead the master planning process.
And that's a pretty big job. It pays what, 80 to 100,000.
That's
a
our
year?
budget. Yes. We
And
figured, just like that's comparable to what our airport manager makes, for example. And so we're hopeful that within, who knows where the person will come from. And again, hopefully housing won't be an impediment to getting that person
I was just going to
to
ask
be
about
here.
that.
But I think the chances are great. Having actually participated as a member of the airport board recently in a candidate search to consider a succession plan for the current management there are actually more people in the marketplace than we would have imagined for that role. And by the same token, I think you can expect that we'll have more than enough good qualified candidates to choose from. So that person will initially, sort of be a one-man show. We're hoping that he or she comes with as much relevant technical experience as well as grant application experience, and really can be a driving force because, although your board membership is composed of government representatives or elected officials, you don't want them screwing things up on a management basis, and they're not in the business of running a transit system. So identifying the right person and the person with the skill set and the history and experience of doing that kind of work or overlapping skills from another comparable trade or profession, I think is it's an exciting thing that's actually going to send that process far more forward faster than any of us really can articulate at this moment.
So there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, setting the SMART board up, finding the people who are going to work peripherally through this organization.
We've really had to lean heavily for the moment on,
Yeah.
You mentioned that we're looking for a legal advisor for the SMART. Up till now, we've basically, through the good graces of the 2 towns in the county, we've been able to ask questions of their attorneys and seek sort of some guidance as to how to formulate proposals and whatnot. And so that is a process that we need to be weaned off of using staff that's not involved with SMART. that's coming from the other governments. So I think we'll find that within, I would expect probably late January, February, we'll have a legal services provider, a third party, and you mentioned we actually have 5 applicants for that process at the moment, or for that position, for that role. It's not a full-time thing. There are smaller specialized boutique law firms and practitioners who do nothing but represent municipalities and special governmental entities. So I think there again we'll have plenty of good choice, and somebody hopefully that's got a lot of insight as to, okay, well, when the Pikes Peak Transit Authority was doing this, here's what the issue was, and here's the workaround, or here's here's the roadmap that legally we need to be on the straight and narrow and follow.
So bottom line, when are people going to start seeing tangible effects of their yes vote that they made for this RTA back in November?
My hope is that whoever the executive director is, that person is able to get into the fall grant cycle for certain things. I know Nina Kothke from the county was sort of advising us, look, there are certain types of grants, and you really probably have a greater chance of getting capital asset grants. So that person hopefully will have some of those in the pipeline already. I know that the board chairperson, Leila Benitez, is actually going to personally devote time to trying to get a technology and IT-related grant so that the executive director and his or her staff can actually potentially be equipped both with hardware and software, and potentially any other IT needs, so that that entity is supported to some degree with that. So I would say, depending on the timing for the awards of those grants, we'll certainly use the rolling stock that we currently have within the town of Telluride that we use for Down Valley service. That'll continue. And then the master planning that the executive director will lead will then, hopefully within the 3rd and 4th quarters of 2017, lay out the network of incidental supplemental routes and services. So,
what are you we talked about 2016, what are you most looking forward to next year?
That's a good question. Well, I think we have other quality of life, issues that are lingering. We've had a very robust discussion, and we've solicited feedback from the public about festival sort of balance between festivals and individuals' qualities of life there. And I think you'll see going forward, I think very hyper scrutiny applied to potential concerts or future applications, and also trying to figure out what the right balances or crowd sizes are. So I think we got the message on that, and so I think you'll see that implemented in action. We also have a sort of a pet policy, a leash policy, and a pet waste sensitivity training exercise that we need to actually undertake a little better than we're doing it now. And some of that is, people come in and out of the community all the time. We have a very large, visitor population, and so to be fair, there's not always a tradition in every community of picking up, and so I think we have to make that even easier than it is now, as well as remind people that good dog owners need to keep their dogs leashed, and we may need to expand the area where there's a formal leash requirement. So I think you'll see hopefully our canine management policy ramped up a bit, that hopefully will produce a better quality of life for everybody and for safety and health of pets and their owners. So.
And lastly, Telluride Gives Day is tomorrow. And I'm wondering, there are over 60 nonprofits vying for donations. I know you're going to donate to Kodo and Telluride TV, but do you favor a nonprofit?
I have in the past
Who will you
only donated to Kodo.
Really?
In our marketplace,
Oh.
yes. I've usually directed my giving toward my education institution. I had the good fortune of getting a full scholarship to college, and so I didn't have to, neither I nor my parents had to go into debt or pay a penny for my undergraduate education. So I tend to direct the bulk of everything I have disposably to them. So that being said, there are obviously scores of worthy causes here in town, and frankly, a lot of those charities are things that do the work of government. They actually take a lot of the burden on that would otherwise fall to some social services entity. And we don't have a sophisticated social services support network built out. So to the degree that we can do things like support the San Miguel Resource Center or whatever, those are critical quality of life and basic safety and welfare issues that a lot of groups do. And so I think that if I were gift splitting, I would, obviously try to be politically correct and give something to everybody. But for now, I'll stick with Kodo.
Good answer. Well, thank you so much for stopping by, Sean.
Thank you,
Merry
Caitlin.
Christmas
It's been a
and
pleasure.
Happy New Year.
Happy holidays to you and your family, too. All right. Thanks very much.